There are a lot of positive things you can say about Hearthstone as a game. Flashy effects, fantastic artwork, familiar characters, and the accessibility of being free to play, and all of it wrapped with Blizzard Entertainment's signature seal of quality. But Hearthstone having a perfect game soundtrack, it might not be the first thing that comes to mind on that list. You might think, sure, Hearthstone's music is a fun collection of medieval tavern grooves, but it's no epic like the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and surely it can't compare to the soundtrack storytelling in something like God of War. It's just a card game after all. Well, I'm here to try and help you see things from a different angle, and show you why this soundtrack is an example of perfection to game developers and composers alike. Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. My name is Silgor, fantasy music composer for your next adventure. Hearthstone first released in 2014, promising to be another golden goose for critically acclaimed game developer Blizzard Entertainment. Rather than being a real-time strategy game like Warcraft or Starcraft, or the hugely successful MMO World of Warcraft, Hearthstone was at the front of Blizzard's new creative frontier, and their first step into a different arena, the digital card game genre. The trailer released with all the promise of a success, vibrant artwork and voice acting,
for Doomhammer!
A new concept with familiar characters. It was the perfect formula of a little bit of something we knew, combined with a little bit of something we didn't. 8 years on, the game has been a huge success and is still popular in 2022. And whilst the current incarnation of the game, and furthermore the company that made it, is falling under increasing scrutiny, the original soundtrack for Hearthstone has stood the test of time as a subtle yet brilliant accompaniment to Blizzard's smash hit card game. So what makes it so good? Firstly, I want to quickly address three things that, in my opinion, make for a good soundtrack. Number 1, the sound should match the tone of the game. Number 2, the sound should enhance the gameplay, but not overpower it. And number 3, the soundtrack must cater to the needs of the project brief, however circumstantial that may be. And Hearthstone certainly had some unique circumstances. At the game's conception, composer Peter McConnell was set a very difficult brief. Hearthstone was to be set in the fantasy world of Azeroth, the same universe as older Blizzard titles like Warcraft 3 and the enormously popular World of Warcraft. Blizzard's musical director Russell Brower said that he wanted to take the sound of these old Blizzard favourites in a new direction. So in order to do this, Hearthstone had to take the big battle epic soundscapes from Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft and adapt them into something entirely opposite, a small-scale, tactical card game played in a tavern. Now, World of Warcraft's soundtrack was massively multiplayer. It had to encompass the sheer size of the player world and accompany the epic story with its music. McConnell needed to adapt this huge scale and musical drama into a new genre, a jovial card game for just 2 people. Fight or flight on the battlefield to winner takes all in the bar. And since Hearthstone was intended to be a franchise that stood on its own 2 feet, rather than a spin-off for an already successful title, it had to acknowledge the musical motifs of these games without falling into their shadows. And if that wasn't pressure enough, this mammoth task was issued by a company whose reputation at the time was one of unwavering success. Again, it's not an easy brief at all, but when the pressure mounted, Peter McConnell did not disappoint. Let's listen. For me, this soundtrack oozes playfulness from the get-go, and this is good. After all, Hearthstone is a game about playing cards in a tavern and having fun, with an undertone of fierce competition and the associated storm of emotions around victory and defeat. soundtrack's bouncing rhythm both applies playfulness when paired with upbeat, happy melodies, and also drama when McConnell switches to more dramatic melodies. The consistency of the pace throughout allows these mood switches to be as carefree as they would be in the game itself, matching the triumphs and defeats that Hearthstone's all about. Another thing I love about this soundtrack is the warmness of those low strings. It immediately makes me think of a warm, indoor space, which is good, as the game setting is inside a tavern. But it's not just any old pub that we're in. This is a tavern in the world of Azeroth, full of a diverse crowd of patrons from the expansive world of magic and mystery. You've got joyful, ale-swigging dwarves, snooty elves, and the occasional bad-tempered orc. Or in gaming terms, casuals, elitists, and ragers, all taking part in the same great game of Hearthstone, and the soundtrack reflects this very well. You've got a diverse array of acoustic instruments, matching the diverse patronage that a tavern in Azeroth would have, and McConnell has also done a great job of incorporating instruments like the harp and various old-sounding guitars to match the sound tropes one would expect in medieval fantasy. Furthermore, McConnell's songwriting style is consistently fluid and makes an effort to spotlight all of the individual instrument voices in his arrangement as much as possible. The result creates a feeling of very real music, the sort of live music you'd expect inside a pub or a tavern. And there's no big horn sections or anything like you get in the huge World of Warcraft soundtrack. Instead, this soundtrack better serves the scale of the game and the setting, a cozy tavern and a game between two players. But Peter McConnell hasn't neglected the presence of World of Warcraft in the soundtrack, and here's a great example. McConnell adapts a grandiose refrain from World of Warcraft's soundtrack into the bouncing grooves of his tavern band. This adaptation seamlessly fits in with the melody of the main theme. It re-injects a bit of drama amongst the jovial tones, reminding us that the cards we play within the game are characters from a world of war and high stakes, all without detracting from the consistent musical tone that the soundtrack has established. The immersion is never broken, but those nods to old games, they're still there. This leads excellently into another triumph for McConnell's music. All the tracks are totally consistent in their playful grooves and dynamic voicing, live feel, and fantasy tones. So the soundtrack matches the tone of the game, but now let's explore further to see how Peter McConnell's music complements Hearthstone's gameplay itself. Now, I might feel that Hearthstone's soundtrack is perfect, but composer Peter McConnell didn't hit perfection the first time around. When playing the first incarnation of the game's soundtrack in Blizzard offices, he felt it was good, but it didn't quite gel with Hearthstone's gameplay. It was only after he went and saw two people playing the game against each other that he got more of an idea for how the soundtrack should be. And this is something I feel is hugely important for both game developers and composers alike. It is key for the composer to understand both how the game is played and also how it feels to be a player in order to make the best possible music for the project. So with this in mind, McConnell went back to the drawing board and set about making changes that delivered on the crucial aspects of Hearthstone's gameplay. As the game of Hearthstone begins, you are greeted with a choice of 3 starting cards. If you don't like these cards, then you can mulligan them once for some others from your deck. Lots to consider in this early phase, and the soundtrack bears this in mind. This track totally contrasts the bouncy rhythms of the rest of the soundtrack, and uses only a few instruments to match the less intense and more introspective nature of this phase of the game. It really fits the bill of thinking man music. Once you've chosen your starting hand, the early game truly begins, and you seamlessly transition into the beginning of one of McConnell's tavern grooves. At the start of the game, turns are simple and somewhat predictable. The board is empty as the players size each other up and wonder what tactics their adversary may deploy. Any cards played are usually low in power and non-threatening. The music follows this excellently. The tracks consistently begin with warm riffs setting the pace. They use fewer instruments in the arrangement to match the simpler nature of play in the early game. As the game goes on, players get more cards and more mana points, allowing them to play more cards per turn. The turns get more complex, and the potential for power shifts between winning and losing increases exponentially. Things get a lot more flashy, basically. The music adds more voices into the arrangement and greater dynamics in volume and presence to adequately capture the increasing chaos behind the more powerful cards. Hearthstone to me is like a duel of minds. The contemplative tactics of chess meets the drama and spectacle of something like Yu-Gi-Oh! You build a deck from 30 cards you choose yourself and then duke it out with others who have done the same. Each deck employs a different strategy that allows you to get the upper hand on your opponent. Some decks are patient and focused on counterplay, whilst others are aggressive and try to overwhelm their opponent before they can adequately respond. This play versus counterplay pacing is beautifully mirrored through McConnell's call and response style songwriting. McConnell lets different instrument voices take the lead on the melody to almost personify quips between the players themselves. All the while, the unfaltering pace of the guitar preserves that competitive atmosphere until a winner has finally been declared. And it's not just on the competitive game board where this is true. Even the builder deck music implements the same attention to detail. This piece is perfectly suited to the feeling of strategizing the next best deck. It really makes you feel your brain cogs turning. It makes me feel really pensive and conjures an image of like my brow furrowing and a voice in my head saying, "I wonder." McConnell's soundtrack stays true to the brief and enhances the nature of gameplay without overpowering it. There are no overbearing stings or sound effects to tell the player how to feel or threaten the musical tone of the game. McConnell keeps it subtle, but just right. And now for the last point, nailing the project brief. Blizzard's musical director, Russell Brower, said that he wanted to take the music of these old Blizzard favourites and take them in a new direction. And being an excellent composer, Peter McConnell made sure this happened. As a result, Hearthstone's soundtrack is packed with little musical motifs from both World of Warcraft and from Warcraft 3. To list them all here as examples would make the video far too long. So I've chosen instead to focus on where the examples are best, and that, I feel, is in Hearthstone's expansions. Hearthstone's expansions introduce new minions, game boards, and music, all based on the original zones from World of Warcraft. Peter McConnell doesn't just throw these musical motifs in callously, but instead adapts them to his existing, upbeat Hearthstone format. My favourite example of this adaptation, though, is in the music for Hearthstone's Blackrock Mountain expansion. McConnell takes the brooding ambience from World of Warcraft's Blackrock Mountain and adapts it into something that matches the playful, groovy tempo of Hearthstone's competitive gameplay. And really, this is quite amazing, so take a listen. How something so stylized and foreboding can be adapted into such a playful theme. It really is quite special, so big bravo to Peter. So there you have it. Now, I could really talk about this soundtrack forever, as it's a personal favourite of mine, but instead I want to focus on the core points of what we've been over in the video. I feel Hearthstone is a perfect game soundtrack because it puts the identity of the game, the needs of the player, and the details of the brief before its own ego. McConnell's soundtrack matches the tension and fun of the competitive gameplay without stealing the show. Its dynamic arrangement allows it to dive in and out of focus where the game needs it to, whilst being stylistically consistent so as to never drop the curtain of immersion. Its diverse voices allow it to be jovial and moody at a moment's notice, matching the shape-shifting and chaotic nature of the game itself. And the free-form playing style of the instruments in the soundtrack not only creates a real feeling of live music, but keeps the songs refreshing enough to be listened to again and again, particularly for an infinitely replayable game. Add to that a seamless melodic homage to the musical themes of the game that inspired its art and characters, and well, that's why I think Hearthstone is an example of a perfect game soundtrack. I recommend that all game developers, composers, or even just music fans check out the soundtrack for yourself. It's really easy to listen to and always reminds me not to skip the small details, as you know, they're really important. And to Peter McConnell, well, all I have left to say is...
Well played.